Energy invention suppression cases. In their efforts to improve the well-being of their fellow humans, inventors often suffer poverty, slander, and suppression. Inventors of energy devices in particular have been threatened by large energy corporations who are allied with the United States government and seek to enslave people in subtle ways. The tactics used against energy inventors include legal imprisonment on false charges, harassment by the IRS, and outright criminal death threats, beatings, bribery, burglary, vandalism, and arson. At least a few inventors have been murdered if they were not dissuaded by other means. Sometimes, however, alleged energy inventions actually have been scams, or were tested incorrectly, and their inventors then claim to be victims of a conspiracy. Many inventors merely have been ignorant of the laws of nature. The history of perpetual motion machines provides ample proof of that fact. Many otherwise brilliant inventors have been poor businessmen who signed defective contracts or whose personalities prevented successful negotiations. Some have failed to persevere. It can take decades to bring an invention to the marketplace, and the vicissitudes of life interfered with their plans. Others unfortunately died of natural causes before they achieved success. Adding to the practical difficulties of pulling out of thin air new energy inventions that have never before been thought of, testing prototypes of some of these energy inventions can be frustrating due to a weird quirk of nature. Thomas E. Bearden, Ph.D., reports that certain types of energy inventions interact with their local vacuums. Thus their coefficient of performance can vary from place to place, due to the local vacuums themselves differing. A machine would produce over unity energy in one location, then inexplicably quit after being moved to another location. Dr. Bill Tiller, former head of the Materials Science Department of Stanford University, developed a unique detector which required that he grow its proper pattern in the local vacuum interaction environment. Experimental results from the detector helped Bearden understand changes in interaction between a local vacuum and a novel machine. All too many times, however, the conspiracy to suppress new energy inventions has been very real. For energy invention suppression updates, see http://www.energysuppression.com. Energy invention suppression case statistics. Number of energy invention suppression incidents 95. Number of dead, missing, or injured energy inventors, activists, and associates 20. Number of energy inventors and associates threatened with death 32. Number of energy researchers and associates imprisoned or falsely charged 5. Number of incidents of energy invention suppression by the United States Government, Patent Office, Central Intelligence Agency, Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S. Marshals, Army, Air Force, Navy, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Defense Intelligence Agency, SWAT. Teams, National Security Agency, U.S. Postal Service, Department of Energy, Department of State, Securities and Exchange Commission, Food and Drug Administration, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Internal Revenue Service, Rural Electrification Administration, White House, Consumer Product Safety Commission, Small Business Administration, and Canada's Royal Canadian Mounted Police 59. Number of inventions classified secret by U.S. Patent Office 5,000. Number of incidents involving oil companies 9. Number of dead, missing, or injured energy inventors, activists, and associates 20. Number of energy inventors and associates threatened with death 32. Names of companies, banks, state agencies, private groups, and universities involved with energy invention suppression. Standard Oil, Zapata Petroleum, Atlantic Richfield, ExxonMobil, Shell Oil Company, General Electric Company, Yakuza, California Air Resources Board, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, Wells Fargo Bank, Ford Motor Company, General Motors Corporation, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Queen of England, Morgan, World Bank, Rockefellers, Carlyle Group, and Bush family. Nikola Tesla, wireless power and free energy from ambient. Nikola Tesla invented the alternating current electrical system we use today, and dozens of other technologies. Many of his other inventions are fundamental to the modern electrical world. The U.S. Patent Office has 1,200 patents from Tesla, and it is estimated that he could have patented an additional 1,000 or so inventions from memory. Nikola Tesla was undoubtedly one of the greatest scientists who ever lived. Tesla's magnifying transmitter, built in 1895 at Wardenclyffe on New York's Long Island, has been suppressed, largely by ignoring and disdaining it, but in recent years it has received new attention. For its potential to power civilization with radio broadcast electricity, possibly even without fuel. The project was financed by John Pierpont Morgan. But Tesla was not an astute businessman, and he affected a disdain for money. It is popularly believed that when J.P. Morgan learned that Tesla's system would provide free energy, he stopped funding the work. As reported by Robert Nelson, see his comprehensive energy inventions website www.rexresearch.com. The fact of the matter is that, rather than arranging a comprehensive financial agreement for development of the system, Tesla simply dunned Morgan for relatively small sums of money at regular intervals. The personal nature of their financial relationship is evident to anyone who takes the time to read Tesla's correspondence with Morgan, not an easy task, as Tesla's handwriting is difficult to read. For more history, see Leslie R. Pastor's introduction in http://peaswiki.com/index.php/site:/lrp:"motionless electromagnetic generator". Tesla also built and drove a Pierce Aero car during the 1930s which ran on a free energy device without refueling. Benjamin Fulford in a stunning early July 2007 interview by Jeff Rentz, see interview transcript in http://bellichow.org/en/article.php3?id article = 15376, claimed that his great-grandfather George Taylor Fulford was one of the richest men in the world. He also was the largest stockholder in General Electric. When he learned J.P. Morgan had abruptly backed out of supporting Tesla, Mr. Fulford pressured General Electric to step in. He was going to finance Nikola Tesla, but he was murdered by the Rockefellers in 1905. It was made to look like a car accident. And the family fortune was stolen by the Rockefellers. Benjamin Fulford's grandfather was only 3 years old at the time. His grandfather didn't know how to suspend his assets. After Morgan died, his heirs and managers, who did not have a working relationship with Tesla, stopped supporting construction of the transmitter. The tower was demolished during World War II, allegedly because it could serve as a landmark for German submarines. Some modern conspiracy theorists have claimed that it was destroyed in order to suppress the technology. Perhaps so, but in any case, now we suffer with a monstrous grid system that is controlled at many levels, rather than enjoying the energy freedom Tesla had envisioned. In a speech presented in 1988 on the subject of climate change factors, ozone layer crisis, and zero-point energy technologies, see below for complete text, Adam Trombley reported information from a contact that Tesla was poisoned and died in 1943 the night before he was scheduled to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Tesla had intended to propose to Roosevelt that perhaps we should look carefully at the fact that we can get all the energy we need from any space we happen to be in. The U.S. government's Federal Bureau of Investigation confiscated 2 truckloads of Tesla's written work after his death, much of which remains classified. Robert Galka, high-powered Tesla-type energy tower. In 1981 in Wendover, UT, Robert Galka, a well-known Tesla researcher, was victimized by an attack on his workshop which has, for years, been in a deactivated Air Force hangar. His high-powered energy tower outside the hangar was partially destroyed. A witness said insulators and sections of the tower were laying around the base. In the meantime, the rent on the Air Force hangar has been raised 1,000%. These new difficulties now threaten to bring an end to his research with Tesla devices. Source: http://psyche.com/energy/directory:suppression right parenthesis. Bruce De Palma, N. 1 homopolar generator. Harvard-educated Bruce De Palma, who taught physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for 15 years, invented the homopolar electricity generator, also called the N-machine, that could provide cheap, inexhaustible, self-sustaining and non-polluting energy. The N-machine uses principles that flout conventional physics and are still not fully understood. A 100 kilowatt N1 homopolar generator prototype sat in his garage. It could power his whole house. But De Palma was afraid to turn it on for fear the U.S. government may confiscate it. In early November 1980, the night before Bruce De Palma was scheduled to leave for Germany to be the featured presenter at Hans Knepper's Gravity Field Energy Conference in Hanover, Germany, De Palma got a phone call from U.S. astronaut Edgar Mitchell claiming the CIA has information to the effect that if you go to Germany you will not be coming back. And you better watch out what you do. They're in Santa Barbara, or you might get your head blown off. Mitchell was best friends with George H.W. Bush at that time, directing the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. De Palma eventually left the USA to live in New Zealand. Bruce De Palma, Free Energy Update November 14, 90. Audio cassette number A1009, $99. Live on Something's Happening. Bruce De Palma, inventor of the N-machine, so-called free energy, presents an update on its development including U.S. Navy development, a letter by U.S. astronaut Edgar Mitchell on the validity of the invention, and the forced imprisonment of De Palma's chief backer. For more information about George H.W. Bush's involvement with the CIA, read The Truth Out. Article: Bush Sr. Early CIA ties revealed in http://www.truthout.org/docs2006/0109007 9. January 2007. Newly released internal CIA documents assert that the former U.S. President's original oil company, Zapata Petroleum, was established in 1953 by joint efforts with Thomas J. Devine, a CIA staffer. Devine and Bush visited Saigon early January 1968, shortly before the North Vietnamese launched their Tet Offensive. Marshall Douglas Smith, in his book Black Gold Hot Gold: The Rise of Fascism in the American Energy Business, see below, exposes how the war in Vietnam was not allowed to end until the very day that Standard Oil had completed using the U.S. Navy to explore Vietnam's offshore oil fields for 10 bloody years at nearly no expense to the company. The war was needlessly prolonged by months of silly wrangling over the shape of the Paris peace negotiation table, and by Henry Kissinger's obfuscations. Mixed chemical stone. A mixed chemical stone was found in England and secretized by the Queen. It generated its own electrical sparks. This material appears to be a version of rocks which self-generate voltages such as those. Researched by John Hutchison, Thomas Henry Moray, see below, and Thomas Townsend Brown. The Queen's holdings are so extensive that it may be that she was not personally involved or even aware of the stone. The Queen may not have very much scientific understanding anyway. April 7, 2006. Wells Fargo Bank announced they finally invested $5 million of the $1 billion intended for renewable energy. Where did they invest? In a mutual fund, Carlyle/Riverstone Renewable Energy Infrastructure Fund I, Limited Partnership. Funny thing, who are the three largest stockholders of Carlyle Group? The answer in order of largest percentage owned. Source: Al Martin. 1. The Queen of England. 2. Bush family. Ben Laden family. President George W. Bush's brothers Neil and Marvin Bush might be among the secret leaders of ongoing viciously thorough energy invention suppression. http://www.nogw.com/shadow.html. Neil Schmidt, hydraulic wind turbine. Neil Schmidt stopped in Gary Vesperman's office May 12, 1995 to discuss his invention of a hydraulic wind turbine. Schmidt had lived in Las Vegas for 7 years. 9 years previous, when he was living in the Seattle area, he went into a federal Small Business Administration office to apply for financial aid. The following day, he received a telephone call and was told it wouldn't work and not to bother with it. He had provided the SBA office hardly more than a sketch, so a hot argument erupted which lasted a half hour. The man ended up hinting death to Schmidt if he didn't stop working on his invention. A couple of days later, Schmidt went back to the SBA office and walked around unsuccessfully trying to identify the voice he had heard on the telephone. Neil Schmidt also has heard that another energy inventor living near his Washington residence had been shot in the head and blinded. Thomas E. Bearden, Ph.D., motionless electromagnetic generator. In March 2002, Stephen L. Patrick, Thomas E. Bearden, James C. Hayes, Kenneth D. Moore, and James L. Kenny received U.S. Patent number 6,362,718 for the motionless electromagnetic generator megascalar energy device that produces over unity, aka free energy. In conventional terms, the device has a coefficient of performance, COP, of 5.0. Tom Bearden offers this brief description of how the motionless electromagnetic generator works. First, the MEG uses a proven technique, the Aharonov-Bohm effect, which the nanocrystalline core furnishes freely. Recall again that memory characteristics of materials is one thing, from Prigogine, that allows direct and intentional violation of the second law of thermodynamics. This free initiation of the Aharonov-Bohm effect in turn engineers the surrounding vacuum outside the core, by adding extra energy density to it in the form of a curl-free A potential. Sharp perturbation, the rise time and decay time, of the input pulses that perturb the core-confined B field, also perturb that section of the A potential still in the core, so that a disturbance of d/dt passes outside the core and on outward into the external altered vacuum with its extra energy. There the equation d/dt equal, E applies, and so in the external activated space real E field energy pulses are formed which radiate back into the MEG core area due to the minus sign. This means they travel in opposite direction to the outward traveling perturbation d/dt. Hence this shows the receipt by the MEG of excess electromagnetic energy freely transmitted back into it from the external altered space, which means that the MEG gets considerable excess E field energy input from the surrounding vacuum. By adjusting perturbation rise times, etc., one can adjust the magnitude of the E field energy pulses returned to the MEG from the external vacuum environment. Thus, the MEG is an asymmetric Maxwell-Lien system of the kind arbitrarily discarded by Lorentz in 1892, and still arbitrarily discarded by present EE departments, professors, and textbooks. Comprised of strong magnets, coils, nanocrystalline cores, and a controller unit with the electronics, the MEG would be able to power an electric vehicle without battery recharging by the power grid. For a detailed explanation, including clear drawings, of how the MEG works, see Dr. Bearden's paper Engineering the Active Vacuum, on the asymmetrical Aharonov-Bohm effect and magnetic vector potential A versus magnetic field B. In that paper, Dr. Bearden points out that electrical engineers and even the usual physicist are unaware of how an electrical circuit is actually powered. For an explanation and a diagram showing, 1, where the energy pouring from the generator terminals actually comes from and how, and 2, why the normal electromagnetic systems self-enforce 1 Colombian peso .0 by killing their own source of this free energy flow faster than they power their loads, see figure 2, Operation of a symmetrical electrical power system, in the foregoing paper. There are several sources of the special nanocrystalline cores which contain the B field needed to effectively operate the MEG. Dr. Bearden reports in http://www.cheniere.org/correspondence/020504.htm that the nanocrystalline cores originally were purchased as metglass amorphous alloys from the former division of Honeywell that made them. He believes that Honeywell actually got them from India. That division of Honeywell was just about demolished by General Electric, GE, in its sudden attempted buyout of Honeywell, vetoed by the European community. GE suddenly moved it across country, wiping out half its staff and scientists, etc. Then GE withdrew. With the division in shambles, Honeywell then sold it off to Hitachi. He doesn't know what's happened since then. Note that there are more than 20,000 papers in the hard literature on the Aharonov-Bohm effect used by the MEG, and that Aharonov-Bohm effect is quite well proven in physics, both theoretically and experimentally. But the effect does not even exist in the electrical engineering model. Since the MEG is deliberately designed to use that effect, the operation of the MEG can only be understood by one who understands the Aharonov-Bohm effect, its generalization to the Berry phase, and the further generalization to the geometric phase. Specifically, any electrical engineer using only mainstream electrical engineering theory cannot and will not be able to understand the MEG's operation. Sources: http://jnaudin.free.fr/meg/v21.htm, http://peaswiki.com/index.php/site:/lrp:/motionless electromagnetic generator, and http://peaswiki.com/index.php/site:/lrp:/the suppression of the MEG by General Electric. For additional information, order Dr. Bearden's books and videos from www.cheniere.org. Thomas E. Bearden, Ph.D. Reporter, J.P. Morgan Emasculated Electrical Engineering Theory. Thomas E. Bearden, Ph.D., in an August 5, 2007 email to Gary Vesperman and 3 other energy researchers, offers an insight into what really happened more than a century ago when the foundations were laid for eventually providing electricity to billions of people. In the 1880s and 1890s, Nikola Tesla, backed by Westinghouse, a decent man, destroyed the great dreams and preparations of John Pierpont Morgan and Thomas Edison for moving the world into DC electrical power, requiring a DC power plant about every 2 miles, for example. Instead, with the support of Westinghouse, Tesla gave the world the much more practical AC power systems, where the electric power is much more easily transmitted over transmission lines to distant destinations, without the serious losses as DC transmission entails. This and Tesla's clearly enunciated intention to give the world clean free electromagnetic energy from the active medium itself, brought J.P. Morgan to regard Tesla as his mortal enemy, to be destroyed or curtailed at any cost. Then, with the near bankruptcy of Westinghouse, the only person Tesla could turn to for financing was J.P. Morgan himself. The university attended by Morgan in Germany was the heart of the Hegelian method, which uses the technique of funding and backing one's own enemies as well as one's supporters, to gain influence over and eventually control of both. So when Tesla approached Morgan for financing, Morgan readily agreed, but only after Tesla signed over a 51% controlling interest in Tesla's, patents. Tesla did so, and that put control of Tesla, his patents, and his great new project directly under Morgan's control. Morgan then simply advanced Tesla only part of the money needed for his tower project, and when Tesla predictably ran out of funds, Morgan simply refused to give him any more. Very shortly this completely crushed Tesla, reducing him to effective bankruptcy, living in a hotel room, and existing on the patience and literally the charity of others. Tesla never recovered from this blow, but eventually died in that hotel room. Many of Tesla's inventions such as radio were stolen from him. After Tesla expired in 1943, Marconi's inventions, for example, were officially declared as take-offs of Tesla's inventions by the U.S. Supreme Court. Isn't it significant that essentially none of our scientific history books credit Tesla for being the actual inventor of the radio, but instead give credit to the theft of Tesla's radio discoveries by Marconi? What does that say about the official ethics of the scientific community? But Morgan was not only ruthless, but thorough. In the latter 1880s, etc., when Tesla was gung-ho to give us free energy from the active medium, Morgan also anticipated the future of this energy freely extracted from the active medium problem that had suddenly risen in Tesla's work. At the time, there were less than 36 electrodynamicists in the entire world. Maxwell had died in 1879, and those who despised quaternions, Heaviside, Hertz, Gibbs, etc., immediately chopped Maxwell's 20 quaternion-like equations in 20 unknowns into a very much smaller vector subset containing only 4 equations. Maxwell's theory was never accepted during his own lifetime, but only begrudgingly and very slowly after, 8 or 9 years after Maxwell's death, Hertz performed speed-of-light measurements showing Maxwell was correct. The real Maxwell theory has never been routinely taught in electrical engineering, which contains only a pale shadow of it. For the full Maxwellian theory, see James Clerk Maxwell, A Dynamical Theory of the Electromagnetic Field, Royal Society Transactions, Vol. CLV, 1865, p. 459. Read December 8, 1864. Also in the Scientific Papers of James Clerk Maxwell, 2-volume bound as one, edited by W. D. Niven. Dover, New York, 1952, Volume 1, p. 526-597. 2 errata are given on the unnumbered page prior to page 1 of Volume 1. In this paper Maxwell presents his seminal theory of electromagnetism, containing 20 equations in 20 unknowns. His general equations of the electromagnetic field are given in Part 3, General Equations of the Electromagnetic Field, p. 554-564. On p. 561, he lists his 20 variables. On p. 562, he summarizes the different subjects of the 20 equations, being 3 equations each for magnetic force, electric currents, electromotive force, electric elasticity, electric resistance, total currents, and 1 equation each for free electricity and continuity. Most electrical engineers have never even read Maxwell's theory, even though they were falsely informed that they had studied and mastered Maxwell's theory. Barrett, one of the co-founders of ultra-wideband radar, comments on the curtailing of Maxwell's theory as follows. The A field for the potentials was banished from playing the central role in Maxwell's theory and relegated to being a mathematical, but not physical, auxiliary. This banishment took place during the interpretation of Maxwell's theory, by Heaviside and Hertz. The Maxwell theory and Maxwell's equations we know today are really the interpretation of Heaviside. Heaviside took the 20 equations of Maxwell and reduced them to the 4 now known as Maxwell's equations. Terence W. Barrett, Electromagnetic Phenomena Not Explained by Maxwell's Equations, A Loctakia, ed. Essays on the Formal Aspects of Electromagnetics Theory, World Scientific Publishing, River Edge, New Jersey, 1993, p. 11. Actually it was worse than that. Heaviside hated potentials, which today we know are primary, thought they were mathematical conveniences only, and that they should be murdered from the theory. Quoting from B. J. Hunt, in a letter to Oliver Lodge in 1893, Heaviside referred to his own work and stated that it represented the real and true Maxwell as Maxwell would have done it had he not been humbugged by his vector and scalar potentials. B. J. Hunt, The Maxwellians, Ph.D. dissertation, The Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, M.D., 1984, p. 317. Heaviside also thought, as did all others at the time, that a thin material fluid ether filled all space, so that nowhere in all the universe was there a point where mass was absent. For that reason, the electrodynamicists including Heaviside thought there were force fields E and H in space, when today we know such electromagnetic force fields exist only in charged matter. Matter is a component of force, by the equation F equal d/dt, mv. Quoting Feynman. In dealing with force, the tacit assumption is always made that the force is equal to zero unless some physical body is present. One of the most important characteristics of force is that it has a material origin. Richard P. Feynman, Robert B. Layton, and Matthew Sands, The Feynman Lectures on Physics, Addison Wesley, Reading, Ma, Volume 1, 1964, p. 12-2 for a commentary on even the unsatisfactory condition of the original Maxwell's theory. Cornell states it this way: even today, Maxwell's equations are given as granted, their validity being justified by experiments. In fact, there is no demonstration of Maxwell's equations from first principles since the mechanical approach used by Maxwell has been abandoned in favor of a new non-mechanical entity, the electromagnetic field. Of course, Maxwell's equations can be obtained from a variational principle, but they are derived from an action appropriately chosen in order to recover them. Maxwell's equations raise a certain number of fundamental questions which have not been answered in a satisfactory manner to date. Patrick Cornell, Inhomogeneous Waves and Maxwell's Equations, Chapter 4 in Essays on the Formal Aspects of Electromagnetic Theory, Edition A. Loctakia, World Scientific, 1993, p. 138-139. But it made no big splash, and the Heaviside severely truncated equations were chosen as the basis equations for the new electrical engineering that was beginning to be set up in a few universities here and there. Morgan apparently had the new equations, for the new electrical engineering being born, checked via group symmetry, adopted in 1870, so therefore well known by the very few leading electromagnetic scientists of the world at the time, to see if the new science/equations contained any of those systems taking excess free energy from the active medium, in short, containing any of Maxwell's asymmetrical systems present in the full Maxwellian theory. In short, Morgan was determined not only to suppress Tesla, but also to suppress any future young Tesla who might be stimulated to see and develop free energy from the active medium Tesla systems. The review of Morgan's scientific advisors was not good. The new and truncated Heaviside equations were still not totally symmetrical, which meant some of those dirty old asymmetric Maxwellian systems were still there. Morgan, of course, just directed that it be fixed. And Lorentz was the fellow chosen or arranged to do the job. In 1892, Lorentz arbitrarily symmetrized the Heaviside equations just to make them easier to solve algebraically, so the story went. He thereby firmly excluded all asymmetrical Maxwellian systems from the standard electrical engineering model, from its very birthing. Lorentz was a great scientist in his own right, but also was fond of appropriating and using other people's work and taking credit for it himself. For example, the whistle was finally blown on this aspect of Lorentz, by the great electrodynamicist J. D. Jackson. See J. D. Jackson and L. B. Oken, Historical Roots of Gauge Invariance, Reviews of Modern Physics, Volume 73, July 2001, p. 663-680. Even the symmetrical Riga-Eugene used by Lorentz, and credited to him generally, was first done by Lorentz, without the T, as Jackson and Oken show. To see the original Lorentz suppression paper applying symmetrical Riga-Eugene, see H. A. Lorentz, Law Theory Electromagnetic D. Maxwell et Son Application Auxiliary Corps Mouvance, The Electromagnetic Theory of Maxwell and Its Application to Moving Bodies, Arch. Neal. Sci. Volume 25, 1892, p. 363-552. Also in H. A. Lorentz, Collected Papers, The Hague, Martinus Nijhoff, Vol. 2, pages 168-238, especially p. 168. This is the work that Lorentz cites later, in 1895, for his proof of the symmetrical Riga-Eugene theorems, the two equations of symmetrical Riga-Eugene. This is what arbitrarily eliminated, from standard electrical engineering, the use of Tesla asymmetrical Maxwell-Lien systems that do receive excess electromagnetic energy freely from the active medium and thus can function at a coefficient of performance, COP, 10 precisely similar to a windmill-driven electrical power system or a solar panel-powered electrical power system. A real system with real losses will always have efficiency, total useful energy or work output divided by the total energy input from all sources, of less than 100%. But if it asymmetrically receives, freely or nearly freely, excess energy from its active environment, then its coefficient of performance, total useful energy or work output divided by the total energy input by the operator only, can permissibly exceed 1.0. No laws of non-equilibrium thermodynamics are violated, as are no laws of physics. Two persons, Oliver Heaviside and John Poynting, independently and simultaneously discovered the flow of electromagnetic energy through space in the 1880s and early 1890s. Before then, the concept does not appear in physics. Poynting only considered a very tiny part of the total electromagnetic energy flow pouring from the generator terminals and flowing through space outside and along the external conductors of the external circuit. That tiny part is the small fraction of the energy flow, the linear part that gets diverged into the conductors to potentialize and power up the electrons and the external circuit. Heaviside also discovered a giant curled electromagnetic energy flow component in addition to the diverged little component. The non-diverged curled electromagnetic energy flow component is more than 1 trillion times greater in energy magnitude than the feeble Poynting component. Well, again, it would simply not do, in Morgan's relentless view, for our young future electrical engineers to know and be taught that the generator actually outputs more than 1 trillion times as much electromagnetic energy output as the mechanical energy input one furnishes to crank the shaft of the generator. That would mean it would just be a matter of time before some young budding genius would discover how to trick some of that giant curled Heaviside component into diverging into the conductors after all, thus producing Tesla energy from the external active medium systems after all. So again, Morgan would have issued orders to fix it. And so Lorentz was arranged once again to do the dirty work. In 1900 he stated that this giant curled Heaviside component does nothing, since it does not interact, and so it has no physical significance. And he arbitrarily just integrated the entire energy flow vector, containing both the diverged Poynting energy flow component and the usually non-diverged Heaviside giant curled energy flow component, around a closed surface assumed around any volume element of interest. Thereby Lorentz misinformed us that this non-diverged giant energy flow had no physical significance and taught us to just deliberately cancel it as a matter of course. A quote of interest is, "This has led to one of the greatest ironies in history: all the hydrocarbons ever burned, all the steam turbines that ever turned the shaft of a generator, all the rivers ever dammed, all the nuclear fuel rods ever consumed, all the windmills and water wheels, all the solar cells, and all the chemistry in all the batteries ever produced, have not directly delivered a single watt into the external circuit's load. All that incredible fuel consumption and energy extracted from the environment has only been used to continually restore the source dipole that our own closed current loop circuits are deliberately designed to destroy faster than the load is powered." Here is a little exercise that is revealing to think about. Take a common permanent magnet and sit it on the bench. Lay an electret across it so the E field of the electret is at right angles to the H field of the magnet. Then, by the ordinary Poynting theory already accepted and contained in every basic electrical engineering textbook, that silly thing sits there and continuously pours out a steady Poynting stream of real electromagnetic energy flow S, given by S equal EXH. The CEM/EE folks just shrug and walk away from that embarrassing problem. A typical comment is one by Buchwald. Poynting's result implies that a charged capacitor in a constant magnetic field which is not parallel to the electric field is the seat of energy flows even though all macroscopic phenomena are static. Jed. Z. Buchwald, From Maxwell to Microphysics, University of Chicago Press, Chicago and London. 1985, p. 44. Scientists such as van Flandern do point out that a so-called static electromagnetic field is actually a non-equilibrium steady-state system, comprised of internal parts in continuous and steady motion. Quoting van Flandern, to retain causality, we must distinguish two distinct meanings of the term static. One meaning is unchanging in the sense of no moving parts. The other meaning is sameness from moment to moment by continual replacement of all moving parts. We can visualize this difference by thinking of a waterfall. A frozen waterfall is static in the first sense, and a flowing waterfall is static in the second sense. Both are essentially the same at every moment, yet the latter has moving parts capable of transferring momentum, and is made of entities that propagate. So are fields for a rigid, stationary source frozen, or are they continually regenerated? Causality seems to require the latter. Tom van Flandern, The Speed of Gravity, What the Experiments Say, Physics Letters A, Volume 250, December 21, 1998, p. 8-9. So there is no problem at all in establishing as large a continual free electromagnetic energy flow as one wishes. Anywhere, anytime. Simply make a dipole, or crossed E and H dipoles, then leave it alone. As Nobelist Lee pointed out, when you have a broken symmetry, then something virtual has become observable. In other words, any electromagnetic broken symmetry can and does absorb virtual energy from the vacuum, integrate it coherently into quantum-sized particles, photons, and emit those real, observable photons at light speed in all directions. This process, the solution to the long-neglected source charge problem, is what produces the steady-state or static electromagnetic fields. Such fields are actually continuous, free flows of real, usable electromagnetic energy. The entire free energy from the vacuum problem is simply this: given incredible free electromagnetic energy wind available and automatically provided from every electromagnetic broken symmetry, dipolarity, in the universe, how does one build a proper asymmetric windmill to intercept and collect some of that real, free, continuous electromagnetic energy, wind energy, and then separately dissipate it in its loads to power them? All our electrical engineers think, design, and build only symmetrical windmills, which use half their freely collected electromagnetic energy to do nothing but destroy their own source dipolarity, furnishing the free wind. The other half is used, in the forward EMF region, to power the losses and loads of the external circuit. So half the freely collected energy is normally used, in the EE symmetrical circuits and systems, to destroy the wind source itself, and the other half is used to power the external loads and losses. Well, to keep the wind flowing, we have to keep restoring the internal dipolarity, broken symmetry, of the generator as fast as it is being destroyed. That is what cranking the shaft of the generator actually accomplishes. It doesn't send a single joule of energy directly out onto the external circuit or power line. Note that the rigorous definition of work is the change of form of energy. When we crank the generator shaft, we input mechanical energy, which once the generator rotates is changed, courtesy of Nikola Tesla, into rotating magnetic field energy inside the generator itself. In turn, this rotating magnetic field energy is dissipated totally inside the generator, to force opposite charges apart and thus to produce that magic source dipolarity with its broken symmetry. The broken symmetry of this internal dipolarity then absorbs virtual state energy from the seething virtual state vacuum, and transforms it to real, observable photons, real, usable electromagnetic energy, which it continually powers out. It is this stream of real electromagnetic energy flow that powers from the terminals of the generator and along through space outside the external conductors. A tiny portion of this giant energy flow, the Poynting component, is diverged into the conductors to power up the electrons and thus power the circuit. A huge curled giant heaviside component remains, but, in any special relativistic situation, is not diverged, does not interact, and does nothing. But the generator actually outputs more than 1 trillion times as much total electromagnetic energy flow, in both the feeble Poynting electromagnetic energy flow component and the accompanying giant heaviside curled electromagnetic energy flow component, as the mechanical energy that we physically input to the shaft of the generator. The knowledge of Heaviside's giant usually non-diverged energy flow component is what Morgan also had scourged from the theory by Lorentz in 1900, so that all the future electrical engineers would think that they only produce the diverged Poynting component of energy flow and nothing else. Very good modern classical electrodynamicists continue to ignore any and all curled energy flow components accompanying the Poynting linear flow component. Quoting Jackson, "The Poynting vector is arbitrary to the extent that the curl of any vector field can be added to it. Such an added term can, however, have no physical consequences. Hence it is customary to make the specific choice." J. D. Jackson, Classical Electrodynamics, 2nd edition, Wiley, 1975, p. 237. Let us comment, Jackson is quite correct so long as the situation remains special relativistic. In that case, vector analysis holds and the divergence of the curl is zero. The curl giant energy flow component thus does not diverge or interact with anything. But if the situation is deliberately made general relativistic or deliberately involves a properly synchronized general relativistic operation, then Jackson's statement is false. In that case, a bit of that giant curled energy flow component does diverge after all, and comes into the circuit to help power it. In optical physics, the negative resonance absorption of the medium, NRAM, phenomenon, released by the Russians in 1967, is just such a process, though that is completely unknown to our optical physicists. But in the optimized narrow-frequency experiments using laser input energy, the COP is actually COP equal 18 as experimentally measured every year in all leading optical physics groups worldwide. But none of them are allowed to say excess emission, but are forced to use the deliberately mind-numbing phrase negative absorption. Anyway, we proposed using that NRAM process to build heat amplifiers in steam boilers, so that with closed positive feedback the steam boiler can be made self-powering. This would immediately and dramatically lower the consumption of coal, nuclear fuel rods, natural gas, etc. in most of our electrical power plants already built and deployed. For a crude little paper on it, see Thomas E. Bearden and Kenneth D. Moore, Increasing the Coefficient of Performance of Electromagnetic Power Systems by Extracting and Using Excess M Energy from the Heaviside Energy Flow Component. PPA, filed and obtained in October 2005. Now released into public domain and freely given away to the public domain. As you can see, our electrical engineers are deliberately, and unknowingly, trained to only build symmetrical systems that destroy their free energy wind input faster than they use some of it to power the loads, and that do not do anything general relativistic so that a part of that now unaccounted giant curled Heaviside electromagnetic energy component also gets diverged, and thereby converted into an extra Poynting energy component. In short, our own electrical engineers, professors, and departments self-enforce coefficient of performance less than 1 performance and are thereby directly responsible for the world energy crisis, giant pollution of the biosphere, and the deaths of hundreds of millions of impoverished peoples worldwide. The thing is this, our scientific community should fund and permit the bright young theoreticians and bright young professors to tangle with the technical problem of how to go about building asymmetrical interception and powering systems, once they easily assemble a free electromagnetic energy wind source for furnishing the input energy freely from the vacuum. Let them first remove the diabolical Lorentz symmetrization from their present Heaviside equations, and then ponder how to then build a nice asymmetric windmill that will intercept and collect some of that freely flowing electromagnetic energy, and will separately dissipate, it to power the external loads without disturbing the crossed dipoles and their broken symmetry. Comment by Gary Vesperman, was John Pierpont Morgan really that sharp a bean counter? In spite of his demonstrated ruthlessness and his exploitation of the genius Nikola Tesla, we would have to give him credit for his conjunction of acute business acumen with his not inconsequential understanding of physics. Morgan left a legacy of energy invention suppression that endures to this day. Frank Richardson, Magnetic Electrical Generator. Richardson's electromagnetic converter with stationary variable reluctance members, U.S. Patent number 4077001, uses two pairs of electromagnets to warp a permanent magnet's magnetic fields back and forth across output field coils to induce a DC output voltage. Dr. Thomas Bearden's motionless electromagnetic generator, see above, is based on the same principle. Gary Vesperman, reporter, energy inventors are buzzed by black helicopters. A few years ago one summer, an energy inventor's house was buzzed twice by a black helicopter. He said they appeared to be an older Hughes model painted black and with no markings. He asked a friend who is an air traffic controller at the local airport. His friend reported no radar sightings. One of the buzzings was witnessed by dozens of people, although the inventor himself wasn't home. Gary Vesperman has since then come across an article in his zero-point energy literature which claims that the radar-absorbing coating on black helicopters and also black stealth fighters and B-2 stealth bombers is depleted uranium. Also about that time the energy inventor and some other people narrowly escaped a flip and crash in a private plane which had a cut on a tire. The cut was then hidden by rolling the plane. Las Vegas UFO buff T.Y.M. Schofield was driving around the desert one year when some black helicopters swooped low over his car and gave him a really good scare. He was on his way home after appearing on a radio talk show. A female Las Vegas resident met a former black helicopter pilot at a 1995 Christmas party. The pilot had become so disgusted he quit. Subsequently, the driver of a car attempted to run over the ex-pilot and killed his wife instead. Gary Vesperman tried to locate the pilot so he could interview him but was unsuccessful. Bob Drach, inventor of the thorium power pack, see below, reports back in the late 90s during one of the winters he had picked up his son from the bus stop. He went past his old machine shop which he had in an old farmhouse and continued up the hill to his house. As Drach crested the hilltop he noticed hovering below the ridgeline out of sight of radar from the flatlands a black helicopter with something that looked like a high-powered shotgun-like antenna on the nose. The copter was totally silent, black, numberless and pointing this thing at his shop. After having dropped off his child at home he went back down to his shop and found all his computers were offline, and not booting anymore. Had his equipment just gotten zapped with an electromagnetic pulse? Was he being snooped on long range? Who knows? The town was about 10 miles due west of Golden, Colorado, and the mountain they were nearest is called Mount Tom. They were between Mount Tom and Drach's shop, very close to the hilltop closest to him, within about 500 feet, but about 8 miles southeast of the large mountain, Mount Tom, just clearing the hill's ridge and below tree line. He would not have seen them at his shop as at that altitude they were below tree line, but hovering silently. When he crested the hill that was when he was above tree line for a moment, and saw them there. He no longer has his shop at the old location as a few years after that all the water dried up in the wells. He supposes that is just a coincidence. The black choppers now and then make a point of buzzing him, and or hovering. But Drach hasn't had any ground attacks, just this aerial stuff. Generally they tend to appear when he runs tests. The two black helicopter stories below were excerpted with permission from Eric Masson's article. Suppression from Higher Up Inventors Beware. The Deadly Campaign Against Free Energy. Devices, Electrifying Times, Volume 8 Number 3 and also in http://www.electrifyingtimes.com/ericmassonsuppression.html. At the International Tesla Society Conference in 1993, a videotape of an advanced generator utilizing tachyon waves was presented without the inventor's permission. This generator not only produces excess energy, but also exhibits time-warping characteristics. The tape was shown on a Friday afternoon, 3,000 miles from the inventor's home. The very next day, U.S. government's Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, 8, agents knocked on the inventor's door wanting to see the device. He politely told them no. The following day, a black helicopter hovered above his house taking pictures of the inside. These black helicopters and even some satellites apparently now have the capability of photographing every item inside a building. On a recent morning talk show featuring the U-2 spy plane, it was revealed that the plane's audio receivers are so sensitive they can pick up ground-level conversations from an altitude of 70,000 feet. The black helicopter stories below were told to Gary Vesperman at the 1997 International Tesla Society Symposium in Colorado Springs, Colorado by health physicist John W. Moreland, Ph.D., 1251 Smith Thompson Road, Bethpage, Tennessee 37022, near Nashville, voice 615-888-3428. Moreland publishes and sells 34 engineering and physics textbooks, mostly old books that he thought ought to be republished and made available. He has accumulated several yards of files on unconventional energy devices. It is reportedly possible to approach within a half-mile of a base east of Nashville, Tennessee which houses at least 100 black unmarked helicopters, some black unmarked C-130 transport airplanes, and black unmarked jeeps. A county commissioner, whose jurisdiction includes Nashville and who owns a farm, became upset with black helicopters flying over his farm at night scaring and scattering his animals. He complained to Congress, the Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Agency, etc. without satisfaction. Some years ago, an inventor in another city had his house buzzed a few times by black helicopters. One night during a particularly aggravating buzzing, the inventor shot down the black helicopter which killed both pilots and demolished his house. He was arrested and charged with murder. At a hearing, his lawyer held up a Washington Post newspaper headline: "Federal government claims black helicopters don't exist." The charges were dropped because black helicopters don't exist. So afterwards, when another inventor in early June one year at 2 a.m. had his one-story house buzzed by a black helicopter 3 feet above his roof, he went outside with a flashlight and a pistol. He aimed the light at the pilot, ran the light along the fuselage, and after finding no identifying numbers, told the pilot he doesn't exist. He then disabled the tail rotor with his pistol. He didn't want to injure the two pilots. The helicopter took off fishtailing from side to side. Since then he hasn't been visited by black helicopters. Black humor? It could be supposed that these two shooting incidents prove that it must conveniently now be legal open season on black unmarked helicopters. Keep in mind though that their pilots are only employees of the U.S. government. See http://www.nogw.com/shadow.html right parenthesis who are being paid to spy on, harass and buzz targeted American citizens, particularly energy inventors who potentially are able to put large energy industries out of business. Some of these black helicopter pilots may even be wondering about why they are participating in suppression of new energy inventions. Eric Masson, in his article Suppression of Quantum Leap Inventors, Electrifying Times, 2007, Volume 10, Number 2, wrote that some say that black helicopters are part of the Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco, which operates under the U.S. Treasury Department, which in turn operates with the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is a private corporation, which operates with the World Bank, over which the U.S. government apparently has no jurisdiction. Thus, the black helicopters can do as they please. Gary Vesperman, reporter, shielding over unity power converters. A typical radio wave that is radiated out of an antenna comprises of transverse waves of electromagnetic energy. These transverse radio waves oscillate perpendicularly to the axis along which they are traveling. The zero-point energy field is an immensely energetic medium, omnipresent throughout the universe, of random electromagnetic waves with frequencies ranging from near zero to frequencies so extremely high as to be undetectable. An over-unity power converter generates more output power than the input power it needs to operate. Hence its ratio of output power to input power is greater than 1. That is, it is operating at over unity. Its leftover output power is thus available to do useful work for free, hence the popular term free energy machine. Some types of over-unity power converters are designed to extract energy from the zero-point energy field. What's interesting is that longitudinal waves of electromagnetic energy are emitted during the energy extraction process. That is, these longitudinal electromagnetic waves oscillate along the axis of their travel, not perpendicular to the axis like transverse radio waves. Detecting these longitudinal electromagnetic waves requires special sophisticated instruments. The U.S. government maintains a network of such instruments in orbiting satellites to monitor the entire Earth for these signals. This same network is also employed to usefully detect, locate by triangulation, and report lightning bolts in real time, which helps to justify the network's enormous expense. If a longitudinal electromagnetic signal is picked up, it is assumed that an inventor is experimenting with a working over-unity power converter or generator. The location of the device is triangulated, and the inventor is then visited, liquidated or whatever by energy invention suppression hit squads in order to safeguard markets for gasoline and metered centrally generated electricity. Copper-lined Faraday cages, normally used for shielding radio waves, are not adequate for blocking these signals from over-unity converters of zero-point energy. One experimenter has suggested using bismuth. The all-seeing Big Brother effectiveness of the U.S. government's zero-point energy extraction detecting and tracking network has been demonstrated by one zero-point energy experimenter's complaint, "I have not been able to locate any type of material that will shield this type of energy. The best advice is to work underground and operate only for brief periods of time, 10 to 15 minutes at random times. Also, heavy cloud cover, wind, rain and other thunderstorms are good for masking your experiments. I had black choppers and power company trucks crawling all over me within 15 minutes when I discovered an over-unity effect in my shop. I think they would have been at my door if I had not shut the unit off when I did. They changed every ground and insulator on all the power poles for miles around my location looking for the source of the energy they had detected." This writer, Gary Vesperman, pieced together the above from various sources. David G. Urith questions its accuracy per his July 7, 2006 email below. Gary, you may want to consider the following with respect to your descriptions of both radio waves and the zero-point energy field phenomena. Radio waves are indeed waves of electromagnetic energy. In some cases they are transverse, and in some cases they oscillate perpendicular to the axis along which they are propagated. But in the case of the CTHA antenna, for example, which is really a magnetic resonance oscillating antenna device, the waveform can be either spherical or hemispherical. In some cases, as in the case of the devices we demonstrated several years ago, the waveform can be narrowed to as little as 0.1 degree-second in a semi-hemispherical form. In most cases, RF waves radiate in a straight line from the propagation point. That is why, for example, RF devices used during the day have a range that is limited to less than 22 miles on flat topology, unless repeater towers are provided at key points along the horizon. However, with the CTHA device, particularly when it is used on the surface of large bodies of water, and more particularly when used on the surface of salt water, the hemispherical waveform coheres to the surface of the water and is attenuated at only about 10% the normal rate of RF signals propagated through the air. In addition, because of the nature of water itself, extra low-frequency radio waves are the only RF waves that can be relied on to propagate a signal through any appreciable distance of water. However, with the CTHA, this is not true. These devices have been shown to send RF signals through the water at much higher VHF and UHF frequencies than any other known devices, with minimal attenuation and virtually no distortion. Why they operate in this way is not known to science in general and to the US Navy in particular. My notion about this is that the CTHA configuration propagates non-local field effects as well as linear ones. Because the non-local effects are neither understood nor optimized in the current technologies, what we observe is the effect of a nonlinear wave propagation device used in applications which are typically linear. The Y-bias manuscript explains how this works and why it is important. Finally, the 0 point is probably not an immensely energetic medium, omnipresent throughout the universe, of random electromagnetic waves with frequencies ranging from near zero to frequencies so extremely high as to be undetectable. Rather, as the Y-bias research suggests, the 0 point is the interface between the physical vacuum and the 4D physical universe we live in. It is not something extrinsic to the physical world we observe but is utterly intrinsic at the finest scales of organization. This insight is the reason the Y-bias information is so important. What it means, for example, is that neither Tom Bearden's MEG nor Korea's argon generator is really operating at the 0 point or anywhere near it. Rather, what they are doing is tapping the quantum pump that operates within the organizational structure of all matter and energy at the fourth scale of development to liberate an infinite supply of electrons via one biased voltage schema or another. What the Heaviside equations and Whittaker's formulation make clear quaternions is that every variety of physical material exhibits a quantum oscillating frequency. Modern science has only just begun to understand the importance of this concept, so the literature is not yet replete with references to the quantum frequencies of all the elements and their isotopes. Nevertheless, when the quantum frequency of any material can be excited by an outside force which causes it to operate in a narrowly defined local in terms of a harmonic resonance, the dynamic properties of self-organizing criticality kick in to produce exponentially more powerful internal oscillations than would normally occur within the subatomic structure of the material. We know this because when carefully prepared isotopes of certain rare earth materials are intercalated within the crystalline lattice structure of conductive thin films, and then exposed to permanent magnetic fields, the atoms of the isotope produce prodigious amounts of electrical voltage and current continuously, without consuming either the atoms themselves nor the materials within which the atoms are held in stasis in the lattice itself. We have a prototype engine which is in its third generation now that has been operating continuously for 76 days. The data recorder shows that the power output has remained steady day and night throughout the test period. The mass of the material has not changed one iota in that time, and neither has the composition of the substrate, the crystalline material or the original atomic isotopes themselves. Bearden solved the source charge problem partially when he demonstrated that mass is organized and deconstructed at the 0 point with a quantum frequency that absorbs a virtual photon from the physical vacuum and then liberates a real photon when two virtual charge ensembles combine to form the organized datum, which is characterized at the second scale of organization. This operation goes on continuously within the heart of every iota of material found everywhere in the universe. It is this fact, borne out by the Y-bias analysis, that gives the lie to the Big Bang theory. All primary particles were not created at the instant of the Big Bang. Instead, everything about the cosmos is being recreated at a quantum rate all the time, at every address in the cosmos, continuously, as part of the autopoietic nature of this physical dimension. So when any inventor tells you he is generating transverse waves of non-local propagation when tapping the 0 point, you can write that research off as fundamentally flawed because the phenomena you are referring to has nothing at all to do with the 0 point. Dave. This writer, Gary Vesperman, recently edited David G. Urtha's groundbreaking 153-page physics monograph Y-bias and angularity, copyright, The Dynamics of Self-Organizing Criticality from the 0 Point to Infinity. I also edited Urtha's 380-page Seeing Past the Edge, which explores and ties together such advanced scientific topics as nuclear physics, mind-matter connection, holographic universe, and the torsion field. Ph.D. Electrical engineer, advanced form of plasma discharge energy. An inventor and a Ph.D. electrical engineer from one of our prestigious universities had made a breakthrough on an advanced form of plasma discharge energy. They hired a hall in a mid-sized town in the US to show off their new discovery. It was an impressive demonstration. One day, his neighbors told one of them they had seen a black helicopter hovering over his house for several hours while he was away at work. Evidently, it was photographing his technology in the basement. A black van, with windows that you couldn't see into, also staked out their lab. After 3 weeks of surveillance, a SWAT team of 6 kicked down the lab door, and with axes, destroyed $500,000 worth of equipment in 1/2 hour. The thugs forced the inventors' faces down onto the concrete floor, and, demanding to see the nuclear source, beat the inventors' heads against the concrete until they nearly choked on their own blood. They had no search warrants, just SWAT team printed on the backs of their brownish uniforms. The inventors were told to cease all further development, and the apartments owned by one of the inventors were condemned. The tenants were ordered to leave, and the PhD electrical engineer is still being harassed by the IRS to this day. Gary Vesperman, reporter, 6 CIA agents at 1996 Tesla Society Symposium. When this writer attended an International Tesla Society Symposium in Colorado Springs, Colorado in 1996, I was told that the inventor of a new type of carburetor that can triple the mileage of a car has had his social security number taken away. Also attending the convention were at least one U.S. government's Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, agent, identified by someone standing in the registration line behind him who happened to see his identification card, and another 5 CIA agents. One of the CIA agents threatened a co-inventor of an electrical generator utilizing 2 types of radioactive waste as he was walking up to the podium to give his speech. However, this story needs further verification. Gary Vesperman, reporter, U.S. versus Japanese support of cold fusion. The leading cold fusion community website is http://www.lenr-canr.org. The site features a library of papers on low-energy nuclear reactions, LENR, also known as cold fusion. Chemically assisted nuclear reactions, CANR, is another term for this phenomenon. The site features a library of more than 500 original scientific papers in Acrobat format, reprinted with permission from the authors and publishers. The papers are linked to a bibliography of over 3,000 journal papers, news articles and books. About LENR. In Japan, inventors are treated as national heroes and are lavishly supported. The Japanese government's annual R&D budget in cold fusion had been $100 million per year, since greatly reduced. Japan has issued over 100 low-energy nuclear reaction patents. In contrast, the U.S. Patent Office has so far approved only 1 cold fusion patent application out of 300. This statistic is possibly out of date. Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann, cold fusion. Much misrepresentation and falsification of evidence happened after Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann announced in March 1989 that they had achieved fusion by electrochemical means. Several influential U.S. laboratories, California Institute of Technology, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, Yale/Brookhaven, reported negative results on cold fusion that were based on shoddy experimental work and a misunderstanding of the Pons-Fleischmann claims. They gave a hostile hot fusion establishment the excuse it needed to conclude that the claims made by Pons and Fleischmann were bogus. In November 1989, a U.S. Department of Energy panel concluded the same after a shallow mock investigation of only 7 months. Eugene F. Malov, Doctor of Science, was the chief science writer at the MIT News office at the time. He played a part in exposing the MIT report as mistaken, possibly fraudulent, and resigned in protest over it in 1991. It is ironic that each of these negative results were themselves the product of the kind of low-quality work of which Fleischmann and Pons were accused. The difference was that the report said what the hot fusion community wanted to hear. This was the legacy of the 1989 ERAB report, but that legacy must now be reversed, and it will be, however long that takes. Dr. Malov later founded and edited/published Infinite Energy magazine until in May 16, 2005 he was robbed and bludgeoned to death by a pair of pathetic drug addicts. The 1999 issue 24 of Infinite Energy, in its 57-page special report titled MIT and Cold Fusion, a special report, extensively documented that MIT violated the trust of its donors, employees and the public in the integrity of its scientific research into cold fusion. In addition to suppressing cold fusion, MIT has also suppressed its solid-state lithium-ion roll-to-roll battery patents, which would increase the efficiency and performance and lower the cost of electric and hybrid vehicles. See Remy Chevalier's report below on nickel metal hydride and solid-state lithium-ion batteries. Chevalier does ask, is it because MIT is cashing checks from the Rockefeller brothers and the Ford Foundation? So he may be hinting that, possibly based on inside information, MIT's suppression of cold fusion and its battery patents is due to its secret protection of the oil/auto monopoly. Most people, including physicists, continue to be unaware that low-energy nuclear reactions are real, and have been verified in hundreds of experiments throughout the 1990s. In February 2002, the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center of the United States Navy in San Diego released a 310-page report titled Thermal and Nuclear Aspects of the PD/D2O System that discusses the overwhelming experimental evidence that the cold fusion effect indeed exists. Dr. Frank E. Gordon, the head of the center's Navigation and Applied Sciences Department, writes in the foreword, that cold fusion continues to be ignored by the scientific establishment, and, to add insult to injury, is being used synonymously with bad science, usually in such expressions as the cold fusion debacle, constitutes one of the greatest scientific scandals in human history, and a human tragedy. While wars over oil are being fought, a potential source of energy that could solve humanity's energy problems for all eternity is being ignored by all but a small community of researchers. At the same time, the dead-end hot fusion program continues to receive billions of dollars in public funds. If there is a scandal associated with cold fusion, this is it. Source: The Suppression of Inconvenient Facts in Physics. The Cold Fusion Scandal, Rochesporner, Ph.D., Cold Fusion Times, Vol 12 No. 2, August 2005. See also: http://www.std.com/tilde-mica/cft.html. Excerpted from The Suppression of Inconvenient Facts in Physics, http://www.suppressscience.net/physics.html. This paper compiles instances of suppression of honest examination of flaws in some of the major theories held inviolable by Western science bureaucracies. In addition to the supposed impossibility of cold fusion and low-energy transmutation, mainstream Western physicists hotly defend, in spite of inconvenient facts in physics, relativity theory, the constancy of the speed of light, absence of signals traveling faster than the speed of light, quantum theory, Big Bang cosmology, impossibility of anti-gravity, commercial hot fusion, and the second law of thermodynamics. Mitchell-Schwartz, U.S. Patent Office blocks cold fusion patents. Mitchell R. Schwartz, M.D., South Carolina D., has 4 electrical engineering degrees from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is an engineer and physician who has been inventing for decades, and has received many patents. 2 of his previous patent applications went to the Board of Patent Appeals and were subsequently issued. Yet, even with that extensive experience, never before had Schwartz seen such misbehavior, systematic prejudice, conspiracy and disingenuous statements as has been demonstrated by the U.S. Patent Office regarding several of his patent applications involving lattice-assisted nuclear reactions, and devices which measure conditions leading to such reactions, often referred to as cold fusion. Regarding cold fusion, it is a real science, and Schwartz and his fellow researchers have conducted solid, meticulous research for almost 2 decades. He recently gave lectures to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency and the Naval Research Laboratory, both of which recognized the utility of his work in cold fusion. No one from either erudite group, more than 100 scientists and engineers, gave even one iota of the disparagement which, in stark contrast, has been doled out from the Patent Office without foundation on a weekly or monthly basis continually for more than 2 decades. Along with the disparagement, the Patent Office has been disingenuous to the federal courts and the Board of Patent Appeals, and has demonstrated not only a conflict of interest but also salient improper behavior. The egregious behavior of the Patent Office with respect to cold fusion patent applications has ignored the U.S. Constitution and Congress's directive to encourage progress and to encourage ingenuity with patentable statutory subject matter to include anything under the sun that is made by man. Supporting said congressional directive, attention is directed to the fact that issuing a patent would normally be mandated because these processes involve the loading of heavy hydrogen into palladium and its generation to form helium and heat. Such transformation has been declared patentable by the federal courts. The Patent Office's use of a two-tiered system to chronically discriminate against cold fusion violates many federal laws. Out of more than 300 cold fusion patent applications, the Patent Office has issued only one patent, and that single patent is believed to be the Patent Office's accident/mistake. To illustrate exactly how the Patent Office methodically destroys cold fusion patent applications, and probably many other energy patent applications, Swartz describes 2 patent applications of his which had nothing to do with the cold fusion process directly, but were in fact methods of improving technologies of measuring loading of hydrogen into metals and of measuring heat production, calorimetry. They both just happen to be useful to cold fusion. The mere hint of application to cold fusion at the Patent Office was enough to warrant, as they see it, harassment, discrimination, and obvious deviation from normal procedure. The Patent Office concocted several false reasons to scuttle his applications. For example, the Patent Office falsely claimed that Swartz had purported that there was excess heat in the invention of a method for improving the measurement of loading of hydrogen into metal. However, those 2 words were never even mentioned in the patent application. Swartz pointed out to the Patent Office their error, who then studiously ignored his affidavit timely filed and supported with many other declarations supporting him. The Patent Office's decision to deny the calorimetry patent application refers to cold fusion 86 times by inaccurately substituting the words cold fusion for the words and phrases heat production, activity, electric power drive, thermally monitoring, thermal output, optimum drive condition, and even for multi-ring calorimeter. Showing systematically hostile, abusive behavior to Swartz and his patent applications, the Patent Office would frequently ignore and not even officially log exhibits and declarations. For example, the Patent Office denied the validity and workability of his 2 inventions in spite of substantial peer-reviewed documentation of careful measured, professionally witnessed experimental results of actually working prototypes. The Patent Office was able to back up such denials simply by not bothering to log pertinent documents. To avoid responding to what was filed, which is actually required by law and custom, the Patent Office brazenly relied upon reference to art irrelevant to the actual specifications and claims. Responding to the initial denial of his patent application for a vibrating electrode for measuring the loading of hydrogen into metals, Swartz appealed to the Board of Patent Appeal. In their decision to again deny his patent application, the board's decision incredibly included only two sentences pertaining to the actual invention. The remainder of the decision's 28 pages comprised of a stale, totally irrelevant carbon copy attack on cold fusion and Drs. Pons and Fleischmann. This has been one of the Patent Office's typical distraction processes. The Patent Office has routinely made many false statements in federal documents. For example, they falsely stated once there is no disclosure, involving temperature, and again for voltage. Yet the applications do discuss temperature or voltage, and Swartz in his July 30, 2007 letter to Gary Vesperman cited the actual pages where these parameters were discussed more than once. These two inventions are only two of more than a dozen patent applications Swartz submitted to the Patent Office where the response has been disingenuousness, obstruction, and failure by the Patent Office to abide by a uniform standard consistent with their own rules. In summary, it is important to remember that this is not an issue of a difference of opinion, it is about a two-tiered system to enable chronic discrimination, suppression, against cold fusion and probably many other energy inventions. It is about an agency of the U.S. government thumbing their noses at the U.S. Constitution, at the U.S. Congress, at American security, and at American citizens. It is about an agency losing checks, losing pleadings, losing exhibits, and failing to answer declarations and pleadings over 17 years. The Patent Office remains quite comfortable and shameless as it viciously ignores Article I, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, the explicit directives of the U.S. Congress which funds it, and even its own rules. It is egregious and odious that some in the Patent Office use systematic disingenuity to rob inventors, and more importantly America itself, of these American-crafted energy-related inventions. The cover-up of cold fusion is complete, as the applications are now transferred overseas to hurt the United States of America. Source: in his July 30, 2007 letter to Gary Vesperman, Mitchell Swartz backs up his allegations with specific citations of law, reference to 140 pounds of over 300 indisputable papers submitted as evidence, legal briefs, etc. Swartz also mailed to Vesperman the August 2005 issue of Cold Fusion Times and a copy of a 39-page petition to the U.S. Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari appealing a negative decision by the Board of Patent Appeals and Interferences. Having never before seen a U.S. Supreme Court legal document, I found the petition fascinating to skim through. For instance, I counted 62 references to previous cases. I used to work as a technical writer preparing computer manuals for 18 Silicon Valley companies. The materials Swartz mailed to me confirm the suspicion I have had for a long time that patents demand the ultimate in technical writing. Robert Bass, Low Energy Nuclear Transmutation. From Don Quixote Tutu, Sir Arthur C. Clarke. Date, Saturday, November 25, 2000, 8:07 a.m. Subject: a warning. My micropellet proposal to Japanese government. Have 3 people been assassinated because of the Cincinnati Group's discovery of a low-energy nuclear transmutation process that can be used, for example, for radioactive waste remediation? From Bass, Robert W., IDS. 2. Adil Shamu, Barbara Delarusso, Eugene F. Malove, George Miley, Hal Fox, Jean-François Cazorla, Jed Rothwell, Jim Wilson, Mitchell Swartz, Pat Bailey, Patrick Bailey, Charles B. Stevens, Elijah C. Boyd, Marjorie Hecht. C.C., Seem Zhong Li. Sent, Friday, November 24, 2000, 6:50 p.m. Subject: my micropellet proposal to Japanese government. Preface: it is readily documented that the CIA and the KGB and the Mossad, etc. all have sprays which can be sprayed upon someone and cause him to die of apparently natural causes. One famous case occurred, not long after Chris Tinsley's death, in which Mossad agents were caught red-handed spraying a Hamas activist in Jordan, and King Hussein told the Israeli Prime Minister that if they didn't send the antidote quick there would be hell to pay, but it wasn't the Mossad which sent the antidote to Jordan, it was the CIA. They sent a doctor from the Mayo Clinic who had been previously accused of being a collaborator with the CIA to revive the victim. The Hamas activist was apparently Hamas Syria-based political chief, Khaled Mashal. As Mashal lay dying in a Jordanian hospital, King Hussein pressured Israel to provide the antidote in return for releasing the Mossad agents. Gary Vesperman, Dr. Lee, approached me semi-publicly after the American Nuclear Society, ANS, meeting, where he heard me talk about the CG's Lent process. He said that he hadn't wanted to spoil my presentation by saying anything negative, but he wanted me to know that he himself did not believe the CG claims and that he could not confirm the claims based on his own experience, and that yet he liked me and wanted me to know the truth. By the way, did you know that Dr. Li has 35 PhDs working for him full-time on cold fusion in China with Chinese government support? Dr. Li said that he had gone to your lab in Utah and watched you and Dr. Jin run the experiment with a good gamma-ray detector. However, he claims that when the thorium begins to precipitate out, the solid angle of the detector remains unchanged, but the thorium is moving out of that fixed solid angle, so that the radioactivity seems to be decreasing, but it is a false alarm. He said that he took the before and after fluids that you gave him back to China and had them tested but with negative results. But Li did admit that the straight line graph I showed could not be explained by his negative assumptions and was affirmative evidence on the side of the CG. Don Holloman of CG says that the 7-man team of Francesco Cellini et al. In Italy tested the CG Lent, one device so thoroughly that data reduction took 37 volunteer undergraduates months to complete. In their publication they claim that they achieved both complete radiometric balance and complete chemical balance of the before process and after process results. However, Cellini's boss died in midlife of alleged natural causes. And you know that Stan Gleason of the Cincinnati group seemed to be perfectly well when he suddenly died at age 48 of a stroke. George Miley told me that when at ICCF 8 he asked Cellini why he didn't follow through on this type of Lent work, which Chris Tinsley was starting in England, having emailed me about Stan's open beaker Lent test just before he dropped dead at age 50 of natural causes. The reply of Cellini was, 3 people have died, and I don't want to be the 4th. George Miley thought that Cellini was talking about radiation sickness danger, but that is not what Cellini has in mind. The proof that Cellini is open to conspiracy theories is that he is on the masthead of the LaRouche magazine, and they don't merely suspect conspiracy, they have been jailed by a U.S. government conspiracy. Lawrence Hecht shook my hand at the American Nuclear Society meeting after having just got out. On parole after 5 years of a multi-decade sentence for selling securities without a license, which was not even a crime in VA when he sold political loans to LaRouche supporters. But despite that, the Secretary of State of VA, who 2 days later was made a judge as payoff for her cooperation, after studying the matter for 2 weeks, decided that political loans are indeed securities. One of Hecht's colleagues is still in jail illegally with a 77-year sentence. The barbaric nature of a 77-year sentence for a technical infraction is self-evidently proof of evil at work. President George Bush's stockbroker brother Neil Bush of Silverado Bank in Colorado was really guilty of the same infraction, but he was merely fined $1,000 and told to be more careful and don't do it again. I feel that my own life has been threatened in writing, indirectly by the British government. Here's why. Nobel laureate Brian Josephson agreed to show at the historic Cavendish Lab the Malov cold fusion video which I had hand-carried to him. Dr. Josephson even published in Gene's Infinite Energy magazine a letter saying he was going to show the video publicly. But when there was a conference there and many important scientists present, suddenly Josephson reneged. He told me in writing that he had first showed the video privately to a very important person, I suspect Sir Brian Pippard, Jay's own teacher, after whom 2 buildings at Cambridge are named. Then he, Josephson, was convinced by said VIP that it is for the best that the public be allowed to continue to believe that the whole CF/LENR thing was a delusion. I tried to get Jay to say why he had agreed. He replied, with copies of his email to me both to Gene and to Yong Kim at Purdue, that it was for reasons of military security. They are afraid that terrorists or rogue nations will learn how to make vest pocket H-bombs. This is why physicist Fred Zimmerman of the U.S. State Department is helping Park with his campaign to outlaw cold fusion meetings. When I replied to Jay that my own theory of deuterium crystals could be used to make fusion micropellets or microbombs, and that I had sent a copy of my proposal to the Japanese government before they terminated their NHE program, Jay replied to me that I had better keep your bright ideas to yourself. In case I pass away prematurely of natural causes, I am going to copy the preceding paragraph and send a copy to Jean Malov and include below a copy of my microbomb proposal to the Japanese government. My MSD bright idea, which Jay says I should keep to myself, has been spread all over the world by internet since late 1997. So it's too late to suppress the idea by suppressing me. Hot fusion requires millions of volts or the equivalent. Hal Fox's cold fusion apparatus requires almost 5,000 volts. Base's process only takes 17.5 volts to ignite. Bob Drach, thorium power pack. Bob Drach's thorium power pack would generate electricity at approximately 1/10 of the cost of current methods of producing electricity. Thorium is sufficiently abundant that the entire planet can be powered for millennia. After 10 years of continuous operation, a trace amount of U-233 is produced. U-233 recovery to repurify the thorium is easily accomplished. Thorium thus lasts a long time when recycled, and consequently is a very efficient energy source. After extraction from ore, thorium does not require energy-intensive enrichment as is the case with uranium. A thorium-powered reactor is inherently safe. It doesn't run the risk of meltdown or explosion, nor can even a dirty bomb be created. Its nuclear reaction simply stops when its neutron exciter is turned off. The simplest and smallest tabletop-sized neutron exciter design is something close to the size of a 4D cell flashlight, and starts at about 500 kilovolt neutron output. In fact, this smallest, most cost-effective system can run off 4D cells for its power. A thorium power pack's neutron exciter does not use radioactive flux components as conventionally done for portable systems. Instead, it relies on Drach's invention of a novel method of resonant phonon pair cleavage using specifically designed nuclear lattice holoforms, holographic waveforms, to induce neutron imbalance in a host atom, where the host atom then attempts to establish balance through the liberation of neutrons. Drach demonstrated the first model of this novel design back in 1966. Commercial thorium power packs can be developed with 50 or 100 kilowatts of output for home use, and up to 1 megawatt for industrial use. They actually are power amplifiers with power outputs of 60 times over input power. Maintenance would be minimal. Predictably, Drach complains of harassment and even death threats for nearly 3 decades. He and his family do not enjoy any peace or security, and the police and district attorneys are allowing the threats to continue. That is what really stinks. It seems like there is more than meets the eye behind the scenes going on. The same death threats and suppression are applying to every piece of technology Drach has been working on, not just the thorium system. The thorium system has the most impact, he believes, to the cartels. Drach had one small section on cold fusion, which he had published before Pons et al. Did theirs, and again it used properly shaped sonic fields to do the separation. The scanning system was the basis again for obtaining the proper waveform patterns. Drach supposes his problems appeared after he demonstrated his inventions at the Global Sciences Conference and during his workshops since the late 1980s. He has some ideas about who the perpetrators are on the international scene, but nothing really firm. It does tie into Russia and the Middle East. At one point during an early workshop there was a Chinese scientist attending, who worked for the Chinese government and identified himself as such. To develop his driving patterns for the neutron generation function, Drach uses his scanning system, which seemed to have been the initial crux of where the recent bout of suppression started, that was pioneered in 1985, developed by 1988, and in full use by 1990. Drach unfortunately has a few more stories about being harassed and death threatened to him and his family by stalkers trying to get proprietary technologies. One stalker has been arrested and taken off his property. The stalkers got away without being brought to justice. The courts instead wanted to cite Drach in contempt for dare, showing that the stalkers were harassing and threatening him. Since that time back in 1992 the same stalking has gone on. There has been email and phone harassment, and the DA's office and police don't do a thing. Drach writes about his technologies on his website http://www.bob-dratch.org. Among the topics Drach covers are energy stuff, anti-gravity stuff and consciousness-altering stuff. The earliest suppression was when Drach's patent application was stolen out of the patent examiner's room and handed off to cronies to develop and exploit. Drach was the one who designed the equations and concept of the Global Positioning System, GPS, that was back in the very early 1970s. As best as Drach can determine, the Department of Defense was who the information he submitted at the Patent Office was directed to. That loss and damages is insurmountable to him. He has proved that his equations which were submitted at that time during filing are the same equations used to this day for the GPS equation. Tracing the evolution of GPS will reveal all the parties involved if one can get past the suppression and cover UPS. It then went to a private professional working for the U.S. government for their own version of the patent and assigned it back to the government. In the early 1970s, Drach was offered $150,000 by them to sell out to them. He refused, saying this is worth billions. Little did he know it was worth trillions. In the mid-1980s, Drach designed a biosensory system that seemed quite capable of sampling fields and generating data signatures making up that object scanned. He continued to evolve the technology. It took on many forms. In about early 2001, he was contacted by the U.S. Air Force to modify that system to locate underground unexploded ordnance. The U.S. Air Force got at his expense about $180,000 worth of consulting and demonstrations, doing a bench test showing that his technology would work. They promised a series of further steps leading to contracts. They then disappeared after they apparently felt they had enough proof that the concept works. Drach subsequently was told that they had handed over the research he did to a professor in Denver who to this day still hasn't solved the missing pieces that they weren't able to figure out. After having given a demonstration of the sensory technology in the early 1990s, Drach was stalked, harassed, and death threats were made to him and his family to the tune of "give them the technology or else." At one point, 2 of the stalkers came on his property armed with knives and were trying to either kill him or his family, to carry out their threat. The sheriff came and hauled them off. When the trial came up, the judge let them walk out free with no penalty, just a slap saying, "Don't bother Mr. Drach again." The judge threatened Drach with contempt of court for having even brought this to his attention. That was in 1992. Since then, Drach has been regularly harassed and continually threatened. The police still refuse to go after the stalker and threatener. They are using extortion now as the current level of threat. Drach has been to the DA's office of 2 states, and been in contact with numbers of police officers to no avail. The threats and harassment continues to this day, including making complaints to the phone company who do nothing to stop such when they use the telephones. Over the last 2 years, Drach has been working to develop a very unique and powerful handheld and truck-mounted sensor capable of discovering Saddam's weapons of mass destruction as well as many other chemical and biological weapons systems. Providing assistance, a former military officer has tried to retrieve documents which were available to any contractor. But Drach and the officer were prohibited as they aren't part of their crony system of preferred contractors. They needed specific signatures which the U.S. government has on hand to calibrate their system to what it had to look for, the chemical agents. Having the signature isn't the formula, it is a roadmap that says contamination or a toxic situation is present. So troops and civilians are prevented from having Drach's technology in a low-cost form. After having spoken enough about the innovation, one of the crony groups has published that they have a working sensor based on the technology that Drach had divulged to the former military officer, and that they are going to charge big bucks for that innovation. So that is suppression again of getting technologies out in a way where Drach can carry out more work. IPMS, thorium, 227 electricity generator. The IN. Francevic Institute for Problems of Materials Science, IPMS, Kiev, Ukraine, from 1951 through 1991 secretly employed 6,600 of the most brilliant theoretical physicists in the entire Soviet Union to work for nearly 50 years with complete freedom. They were able to develop whole new sciences, technologies and materials unknown in the West. Their models of nonlinear quantum mechanics, plasma physics, atomic engineering, nuclear physics and related mathematical and theoretical constructs, which made their development possible, are so unique that they challenge the validity of the most fundamental assumptions embodied in the Copenhagen interpretation model currently held in general acceptance in the West. For example, Western-developed particle/wave quantum mechanics is described by Einstein's E=mc2. The Soviet nonlinear model of quantum mechanics is described by the formula E=m kilovolt energy equal mass at rest as a function of a mathematical constant. Einstein's theory of relativity assumes that the speed of light is constant. However, measurements have shown that the speed of light has slowed down 7% over the past 2 centuries. See http://worldnetdaily.com/news/article.asp?article ID = 39733. Einstein's famous equation is therefore not based on the real world of peer-reviewed experimental results. Consequently, the more correct Soviet model has enabled numerous technical advances not even dreamed of by Western science. Among several energy inventions developed by the IPMS are freestanding thorium-227 isotope electric power generating plants. They can be small enough to power a single home and large enough to power whole communities. They also can operate for up to 18 years without ever requiring refueling or maintenance. Arrangements to commercialize these useful energy inventions by joint ventures of the IPMS and more than a dozen private sector companies were repeatedly sabotaged by the U.S. government's Defense Intelligence Agency and others. Source: David G. Ewirth, The Anthropos Files, Tales of Quantum Physics from Another World, 2nd edition, 2007. Howard Rory Johnson, Magnetron Light-Activated Cold Fusion Magnetic Motor. During the late 1970s, Howard Rory Johnson, a brilliant inventor in Elgin, Illinois, combined light-activated cold fusion with a new type of magnetic motor into a magnetron. His prototype magnetron produced 525 horsepower but only weighed 475 pounds. It could propel a large truck or bus 100,000 miles on about 17 ounces of deuterium and 1.5 ounces of gallium before being recharged. This was years before either Pons and Fleischmann or Dr. James Patterson entered the scene with their cold fusion technology. Johnson discovered the light-activated cold fusion portion of the magnetron by accident when, as he was developing a new type of electronic circuit using deuterium oxide and gallium, he noticed the two materials were producing energy on their own. He could not figure out what was triggering the energy production for some time until he finally discovered it was light. The magnetron's flow of deuterium, an isotope of hydrogen, is controlled by magnetic tunnels. At the point where the deuterium strikes the gallium, a heavy metal electron donor, a beam of light from a diffraction prism forces their fusion. That controlled reaction results in the fusion of two atoms forming a new atom. In the process, electricity is released, and that is what powers the magnetic motor. The magnetron is sealed, however, so light is provided from photon energy produced from coils tied directly to the motor. It is more or less a pulse-generated system. A photon is a football-shaped particle of electromagnetic wave energy. Its energy content is a product of its frequency f and Planck's constant h. When an electron in orbit around the nucleus of an atom drops to a lower, less energetic orbit, a photon containing the energy equivalent to the electron's energy drop is emitted. This explains why light and other forms of electromagnetic energy such as gamma rays and radar are sometimes observed as particles and other times as waves. The heated filament of a light bulb is an example of photon production. There is no way to explain, using contemporary electrical theory, how his relatively small motor could produce such tremendous horsepower. Utilizing his own new electrical magnetic energy theory, Involving a process he called attract, Johnson exploited the magnetic field. He used the top and bottom rotors in his motor. First, the top rotor attracted, released, then the bottom rotor attracted, released. The action of attraction, alternating between upper and lower magnets, used the windings to complete the attract field. Robert Nelson's compilation of articles about the magnetron provides much more technical detail on the magnetron than the foregoing. See http://www.rexresearch.com/magentron/magentron.htm. Johnson constructed his prototype magnetron's 525 horsepower magnetic motor without any of the hardware that is presently used in present state-of-the-art electric motors. Conventional motors use the accepted principle of attract-repel, an energy form that doesn't utilize the magnetic field to its greatest advantage. For comparison, a typical 500 horsepower electric motor has wires exiting it that are the size of a garden hose. The sealed self-contained magnetron has no wires. Thus, other than the magnetron's infrequent refueling with small amounts of deuterium and gallium, the standalone magnetron uses no input power. The magnetron's entire output power is conveyed by its magnetic motor's rotating shaft. Fuel for the magnetron is plentiful, deuterium is derived from water, and gallium is extracted from abundant aluminum bauxite. Commercially available pure gallium is still scarce and expensive. It may well be possible, however, to cheaply transmute another less expensive element into gallium. See Gary Vesperman's list of over 24 methods of neutralizing radioactive waste in http://3c.de/docs/gvcomparison.htm, which includes possible transmutation methods. The magnetron uses no fossil fuel in its operation, and it emits no pollution. The magnetic motor's RPM is 8,000 with a gear ratio of 2:1. Lubrication for the sealed motor is synthetic motor oil, which does not need changing and does not need a filter, because foreign materials such as carbon and varnish are not introduced into the system, as they are in the internal combustion piston engine. This writer, Gary Vesperman, attended the Third International Symposium on New Energy in Denver. Co. April 25 to 28, 1996. I remember being impressed by Gerald Orlowski's lecture Magnetron, Fusion Magnetic Motor, during which he provided substantial technical information on the magnetron. Orlowski reported that, some inside information revealed that OPEC had been keeping track of all competitive technology, and Johnson was number one on their hit list. Johnson was about to manufacture the motors through a nationwide dealership. Some motors still exist, but the owner wants several $1 million for them. This writer Gary Vesperman knows of very few inventions of new energy sources which are reasonably large standalone energy producers. Besides the magnetron, they include Oleg Grishkevich's hydromagnetic dynamo, and electron power systems microfusion reactor, which employs stable high-density plasma electron spiral toroids. Almost all inventions of new energy sources are, or claim to be, relatively small over-unity power converters that convert input power to greater amounts of output power. Bob Drach's thorium power pack is an exception, see above. At the September 14, 2005 public meeting in Green Valley Ranch Casino regarding the proposed regional fixed guideway traversing Las Vegas, Nevada, this writer Gary Vesperman submitted comments suggesting possible power sources for the train, including descriptions of the hydromagnetic dynamo and the microfusion reactor. http://www.rdcsouthernevada.com/rfg/documents/September 2005 public meeting minutes.pdf, pages 19, 77. No wonder the magnetron's inventor, Rory Johnson, was rumored to have been number one on Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC's hit list. The following is an excerpt, slightly edited, from Orlowski's lecture transcript where he tells about his unwitting personal involvement with the U.S. government's suppression of the magnetron. After I saw the magnetron motor, my life changed. I was no longer a happy camper working by myself in a wonderful, fully equipped research machine shop for the Greyhound/Armor Corporation in Arizona. While on a business trip, I saw this motor running in the Magnetron, Inc.'s showroom located in Eglin, Illinois. During my 15 years of electric motor repair, among the hundreds of motors I repaired, I rewound a 500 HP electric motor. That motor had wires exiting it that were the size of a garden hose. The Johnson motor being shown had no wires. Surely this motor was unreal, a con job to get money for dealerships. Yes, there he was, Rory Johnson, standing next to his sealed self-contained electric motor. Upon returning to the Greyhound Towers and telling them what I had seen, they instructed me to call Mr. Johnson. Greyhound wanted Johnson to put forth a plan to install a motor in one of their buses for testing purposes. I called Johnson. He was delighted that a Greyhound employee had seen the motor running, and replied that the testing idea was acceptable. He would set a time frame for just when a bus should be delivered to him. 2 years went by, with no business proposal from Johnson. Then, his former business partner, Mike Marzicola, called to say Johnson had passed away. He wanted me to work with him to get one of the motors running. I flew to Orange County, CA, saw the motor, took pictures, and put forth a plan to Greyhound. Subject to a contract with Marzicola, one of the old worn motors would be brought to the research shop. I would then very carefully reconnect the generator wires that Johnson had cut off prior to moving from Elgin, Ill to California. Discussions with Marzicola brought out that the U.S. government, given the authority by the Congress of 1952, had issued a grab order to take Johnson's motors. Rumor has it, the dough is run by U.S. oil companies and OPEC, and they want no competition, period. Because of this grab order, Johnson had cut the generator wires. He had then put his total shop, with motors and all, on several U-Haul trucks and left Illinois in the middle of the night. He went to California to re-establish his business. But before he could get a motor running, he passed away. Surely, Greyhound would agree to let me restart one of Johnson's motors. The wonderful proposal put forth to Greyhound was rejected by mail. Very agitated, I went to the top office at Greyhound, demanding an explanation. I was met at the door with the comment, "We know why you are here." Knowing the potential savings to the bus company, surely they could have only one reason for rejecting the proposal. They must have believed I was not qualified to start up the motor. Greyhound's top legal advisor stated he was present when the Greyhound board met and discussed my written proposal. He stated the following, "At no time was the thought put forth that you would not succeed. In fact, we discussed all of the hardware designed and constructed by you, and started the conversation from what happens when Greyhound has a running motor. We contacted a state representative who felt this motor should not be allowed to be used in 4,000 plus buses. The loss in tax dollars for fuel alone would be a very huge sum. He then asked me to leave, stating he was sorry that he had to tell me the reason the plan was rejected. Telling Marzicola of the rejection, I offered to personally put in a few $1,000s toward the parts to get one motor running. In return, I would be assigned the dealership for the Phoenix metropolitan area. We signed legal papers in exchange for the money agreed on, and went to work. I still have the signed dealership. The first thing I noticed was that someone had been working on repairing the motors. 3 motors already had new commutator assemblies installed. Each assembly consisted of 3 commutator assemblies on one insulated tube with a metal case to secure it to the shaft. One motor still had the old worn commutator assembly, as it had not yet been repaired. Orlowski goes on to describe his reconstruction efforts and includes interesting technical details about the magnetron's structure and theory. Johnson did not know that OPEC tracks all potential competition to its oil business and that he was reportedly number 1 on OPEC's hit list. His first mistake was publicizing, in many magazines, his plans to manufacture and distribute his revolutionary motor. Eric Masson has spoken with a few people who even signed up for distributorships. Eric Masson had included Johnson and his magnetron in his energy invention suppression anthology, c. http://www.electrifyingtimes.com/ericmassonsuppression.html. In 1979, Johnson placed his engine in a Buick Electra and was preparing to drive it around the country to sign up more distributorships when the U.S. Department of Energy and the state of Illinois teamed up to prohibit his company Magnetron, from producing and selling magnetrons. They first placed a gag order on all the people in the company by using the Secrecy Act of 1952. Secondly, the state of Illinois immediately requested the company to provide information about all of their employees, distributors, stockholders, investors, suppliers, etc. They asked questions that blatantly deny anyone's constitutional rights to privacy. The pressure from the state of Illinois became so overwhelming that Johnson decided to move his entire business to California in the middle of the night. After a year of hearing nothing but silence from Johnson, Greyhound agents tried to contact him only to be notified that he had passed away unexpectedly. This is a particularly troubling part of the story, since he had been in his early 50s and in robust health. Later, Greyhound learned that shortly before he died, Johnson had inexplicably moved out of his laboratory in the middle of the night and taken all of his motors and technology to California. Bob Bass, in his report copied above on low-energy nuclear transmutation, claims that the CIA, the KGB and the Mossad, etc. all have sprays which can be sprayed upon someone and cause him or her to die of apparently natural causes. One speculation is that Johnson's death apparently due to heart failure had been artificially induced by such a spray. I visited Magnetron, in July 1979. I wish I would have taken a photo. Placards were placed over every inch of the large windows in the front of the building listing all of the questions the state of Illinois requested his company to provide. He wrote, "When has the government ever had the right to ask this of any company?" I peeked in the front window and saw one of his motors mounted on an engine stand. Nobody appeared to be there, so I walked around to the rear of the building. I found the rear garage door open and could see the Buick Electra inside. I was about to approach nearer when a man emerged. We talked, but he quickly informed me that due to a U.S. gag order he was unable to talk about anything. I managed to get his phone number and called him from time to time for years following. He was an assistant of Rory's and he kept the information very close to the vest. He did tell me that it was real and it worked, yet not how it worked. About 1984, I began to call all the Johnsons in the phone book in Elgin. I finally got a hold of Rory's son. He too said that it was real, but I got nowhere. Around 1992, I met Jerry Orlowski, and he told me his experience as the employee of Greyhound who was sent to investigate the technology, since he owned electric motors for several years. Jerry was very upset about the whole incident, particularly Greyhound's board of directors' refusal to utilize the technology after he found the technology to be authentic. Jerry even witnessed the government's seizure of the motors in California. Terry Sisson. Energy invention suppression. Pertinent quotable comments from Johnson. There have been very few startling things that have come from a large organization. You don't get anything practical out of a government-sponsored laboratory such as Fermi and Argonne. Johnson believes watching a budget as required by government-funded programs stifles creativity and the ability to take a chance. The U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, is termed a rip-off by Johnson. Right now our government is not looking for energy in any form. A tremendous amount of money is spent on DOE every year, and so far I haven't seen anything out on the road or helping heat your home or helping reduce the cost of your utilities or anything else. For example, the DOE's glamorous multi-billion-dollar hot fusion research program seems to be fundamentally a public relations ploy which allows the DOE's numerous highly paid bureaucrats to have lots of fun making themselves look useful without posing any serious competition to the oil and power industries for at least decades, and may always be for decades. Gary Vesperman. Howard R. Johnson has developed a device resembling an electric motor which produces work without electrical input, using only permanent magnets for motive force. The basic principle of his magnetic motor is that its magnets are arranged in such a manner that its magnetic flux is always unbalanced, thus producing a continuous rotational drive. For patent descriptions, detailed theories and diagrams, see http://rexresearch.com/johnson/1johnson.htm. Two links to additional information can be found in http://www.web-space.tv/free-energy. More information apparently is available from the Permanent Magnet Research Institute, PO. Box 199, Blacksburg, Virginia 24063. Johnson spent 6 years fighting the patent office to accept the reality of his magnetic motor. In April 24, 1979, Johnson finally got a U.S. patent for $1,151,431 for a permanent magnet motor that starts itself and would deliver 5 kilowatts from permanent magnets. Jet Propulsion Labs built a prototype 5 kilowatt generator. In his January 20, 2007 email to the New Energy Congress, Ken Rowan reported, Howard Johnson got his patent because he demonstrated one in the courtroom. The judge ordered the USPTO to give him a patent. I saw a copy of the court document while in Jean Malov's employment. Unfortunately, the whereabouts of that document is unknown, as Jean was not a good file keeper, and he is not around anymore. What was demonstrated was a roller skate on a linear track, fitted with magnets, and a line of magnets over the tracks. The track was slightly sloped up, so gravity could not be attributed for the motion. Since it flew off the track end and was not jerked back, it had to have net energy imparted to it. That demonstration looks similar to the prototype of Stewart-Harris theory of magnetic instability, see below. Johnson's other two patents are number 4,877,983 for magnetic force generating method and apparatus, and number 5,402,021 for a magnetic propulsion system. In all, Johnson is connected with more than 30 patents in the fields of chemistry and physics. The following suppression account is an edited consolidation of information from an exchange of emails between Gary Vesperman and Al Witherspoon, a longtime associate of Howard Johnson. June 2006. Al had read on the internet Vesperman's third version of this compilation, now in its fourth version, of energy invention suppression cases, and had then emailed Vesperman. Al is a businessman and the inventor, in 1 week, of a crucial part of the Hubble Space Telescope that had stymied other engineers for months. To refresh memories for Al's story, Al and Howard had some pleasant visits August through October 2006. Howard is now 92 years old but still healthy with a keen memory. Al's involvement with Howard's project was not from a technical standpoint but rather from the standpoint of technology suppression. Al had never taken the time to write this up. He thinks that it's about time. Al has been holding back his suppression story for nearly 30 years. Howard Johnson actually began his work on this motor in the 1930s. When he first started the project and conceived the idea on paper, the materials needed for the construction of the motor had not yet come into existence. However, he told Al that he knew that someday they would become available, and then he would be able to construct it. The suppression of the motor is occurring by the general methods in addition to Howard's own suppression due to his warranted mistrust of fellow scientists. Things have come up missing and promises not kept. When Howard first introduced the development of his permanent magnet motor, there was a nearly immediate World Symposium organized and held at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. A number of scientists came from all over the world to attend this event. There was quite a buzz in the air about this new technology prior and existing through some finite time during the event. Al met and conversed with a number of them. A couple of them were actually quite friendly. The rest were seething with egomania and the disinterest of speaking to whom they assumed was a local hillbilly. It was not a conference. It was merely a one-sided presentation of the technology and there was no entertainment of questions. The rules of the event were such that questions were to be saved for the end of the presentation. At the end of this presentation, the speakers quickly vanished at the moment of the last word. A couple of questions were addressed, but the respective replies were only "I don't know" or "I cannot say at the present time." The primary focus seemed to be entirely that of debunking the notion of such a device. There was absolutely no positive attitude in the air with the exception of a few attendees who expressed the hope for the further investigation and development of the technology. Most attendees were nearly laughing with skepticism. One who Al spoke with was emphatic with his opinion that the device was viable. Al recorded the event on audio, but there seems to be no record of it now. Al does not know what Howard did with it. When Al visited him summer of 2006, he could not remember the specifics of the tape or where it might be located at the present time. Also at the symposium there were a couple of people making an apparently approved videotape of the presentation. There were no other apparent attempts to videotape the event. Al was the last of the attendees to exit the event. He watched what was done with the videotape. A man took the videotape downstairs and then discreetly gave it to another man. This other man then went to his car and drove away. Al followed him until he arrived at Inland Motors division of Carl Morgan Corporation in Radford, VA, where precision drive motors and systems are manufactured. He got out of his car and went into the building. Al asked the guard if he knew this man and he said that he was not an employee but was a U.S. government inspector from Washington, D.C. From this point on there is no more information about the identity or the purpose of his actions. Some months later Al confronted the directors of the symposium. Their words to him were such that they had apparently reconsidered their position of belief concerning the technology. A little later Al found that these directors were under the direct employ of Carl Morgan and also by virtue of the fact that they stood to receive sizable renewal grants for their respective departments. Do you suppose that it was Carl Morgan who wanted the technology to be suppressed? After all, they stood to gain by creating disinterest such that they could quietly and anonymously pursue it for their own use without the threat of competition. A couple of weeks later the house across the street from Howard's house, which had housed a few of the working class, became occupied by two agents from the National Security Agency. Al acquired the nature of their identity by unusual means. Besides this, they stuck out like a sore thumb, dressed similarly to Mormon missionaries but older in stature. They stayed there for about 1 year. Periodically Al went by there to see what they were up to but only saw them outside once. They likely saw Al at Howard's place on numerous occasions but never spoke to Al and reportedly spoke to Howard only once. The nature of the conversation that Howard had with them supposedly had nothing to do with technology but was apparently just everyday common chit-chat. Al wondered what they did all day. He got to thinking that they probably sat around doing what all government officials do, smoking dope without exhaling while watching cartoons without exhaling. Please overlook Al's slight humor. Then one day they were simply gone. Al asked the owner of the property who they were. He said that they were Electrolux vacuum cleaner salesmen. Al almost busted out laughing. Al's great-uncle was one, and Al has seen several at his front door, but never those that dressed like these guys. During their stay Al received a rather strange phone call one day in April 1979. A man simply asked for Al, and Al simply said hello, thinking that it was likely one of his customers or a telemarketer. He quickly identified himself in such a way that Al could not understand his name. When Al asked who was calling, he simply replied by asking Al if Al was acquainted with Howard and how long. He was very nice and thus Al answered him due to Al's probable youthful naivety. He then simply said thank you and hung up. Caller ID or the *69 features were not available yet at that time. On 3 occasions after this between 1980 and 1983 Al's house was broken into in a non-destructive and undetectable manner, meaning that the method of entry was not discernible as being unauthorized. However, it was very apparent that someone had been rummaging through the house in all the rooms including the garage and basement. No valuables were ever taken. At the time there was some jewelry, other precious stones, silver, gold and a letter from Robert E. Lee in relatively plain view which at that time were valued well over $100,000. These were likewise never touched. Since then these items have been removed to a safety deposit box. Whoever broke in never found any devices or related documentation. However, Howard's house, as far as Al knows, was never invaded until early 2006. Al and Howard have no idea who did this, but there were no prints to be found. They only took documentation which had nothing to do with the technical aspects of the motor or its design. The documents were related to contractual agreements concerning the disclosure of the technology. In 1985 Howard reported to Al that he had struck a deal with General Electric. For $15 million the company had purchased an exclusive, but not sole, license to make, manufacture, market and utilize the motor. By 1986 General Electric had built a very, very large working model the size of a house. It is not being used and is kept hidden in a building under armed guard somewhere in the United States. However, it doesn't quite make sense that the company would build such a very expensive large motor when a much smaller, cheaper motor should be adequate for experimental studies. Gary Vesperman. Al never asked Howard what he did with the proceeds. A reliable source did tell Al that the agreement with General Electric was such that they give the $15 million to a certain charity. Since that time there has been no other publicly known activity with the motor by General Electric. Al suspects that the company is using it to get paid by the oil industry to keep it under wraps, industrial/technological extortion, or protecting the world, or possibly both. However, this notion is merely a notion and surely speculative. Al's guess is that General Electric could simply and easily make a substantial amount of money by keeping things quiet while at the same time using it as a card to play when the time is right. Al knows exactly how they could do such. Howard and Al have found that American and Japanese magnet manufacturers are mysteriously very reluctant to provide the needed magnets. In the report below on Yasunori Takahashi, magnetic Wankel motor, John Moreland explained that the secret to the enormous strength of the Takahashi magnets, at 25,000 Gauss, the most powerful magnets ever developed, is that they contain uranium. The U.S. government forbids importing radioactive materials. Throughout the past 28 years approximately, there have been some reported attempts to construct the motor. Al has never seen one in the possession of any individual outside of the Permanent Magnet Research Institute. Finally, Howard, by claim and Al's personal opinion, has sufficiently disseminated the technology to the point such that the motor can be replicated. Replication of the motor has apparently achieved little known success. There are reasons for this lack of success. There seems to be little doubt that this device or similar devices have been built. They are relatively easy to build and do not require any sort of special magnet type in order to be functional. Actually, ordinary magnets are better from the standpoint of the homebrew versions. Very powerful magnets are difficult to keep seated in place. Also, experimenting with super strong rare earth magnets without special equipment and training can easily cause injury. The notions that are reflected in comments made by others as to the theory of operation are not correct by any means. The energy required to charge the magnets have nothing to do with the energy delivered by the motor. Many would say that this is most interesting and important. Al has found, in the process of examining various cases, that few individuals, if any, have the correct blueprints. Also, the blueprints are not a whole lot of help unless a person has a clear understanding of certain principles of magnetism. Though this motor can be successfully constructed with off-the-shelf components and not to mention being done so in a crude fashion, the apparently ability of most is not sufficient to attain a working model of the rotary motor. Al has seen theoretical speculation concerning certain magnetic principles by respected members of the H.J. Motor Group that further suppress the successful application of the technology. Though likely not intentional, it is nevertheless the result of careless thinking and poor technological vocabulary. Such practices propagate inaccuracy and inability to produce any viable results and end up merely creating a vicious circle resulting in lost art and the downward spiral of success. Al discussed this matter with Howard during one of their visits. They were able to arrive at some conclusion perhaps, but that of which will not presently be disclosed. Al needs to think about it a little more. As far as participation by other individuals, to date, there has been no person that has kept their word concerning certain aspects of disclosure. There have been no individuals that have kept up other agreements directly related to the use and dissemination of the technology. Some individuals have replicated Howard's research in various ways, including the distribution for gain, in such a manner as to claim it as being of their own origination. This may include the distribution of non-functional blueprints. As far as Al knows, Howard has only and repeatedly been the victim of greed and egotistical lust. To date, not one single person has ever commented on Al's advice for making the motor work. This show of apparent ignorance eludes Al's belief. At this point in time, Al does not believe that Howard is highly inclined to divulge any more information to the general public or prospective co-participants. The royalties due on his recent book have not been paid either. This situation will change with the publication of his new book containing advanced theory. Those who have any sense, in my opinion, will be well advised to read it. And as for Al himself, he is presently looking for a few good men. To date, Al has only been in contact with one or two individuals who have shown even a spark of integrity. At the present time, there are only 2 individuals actively involved with the Permanent Magnet Research Institute. Howard's parting and publishable comment from their meeting of October 10 was simply as follows and quite closely matches his exact words: "If you can't believe what you see, then there is little else that I can do for you." Al thinks that it's not always the government that suppresses technology. Sometimes it's the individual who bites off his or her own nose to spite his or her face. That is, the government does not need to directly suppress the technology because the citizens are doing a splendid job all by themselves. However, it should be noted that it is plausible that negative elements hide behind the veil of our good society who serve the purpose of being suppressing agents. It is not necessarily our government which doles out the suppression. They often get blamed for a lot of things which are merely the bad direction of a small individual or group within. Maybe the distribution of incorrect information is being done by the implant of a suppressing agent. Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University does not help Howard, though he lectured there for a while. Most of the technologists there are quite jealous of Howard and for whatever reason seem to be a major contributing factor to the suppression of the technology. The college is where the first World Symposium took place. Al was sent there to eavesdrop and record the presentation, which was largely an attempt to discredit his work. Al spoke with some of the scientists who attended the symposium. Most were quite skeptical, both about the technology and the true intentions of the lecturers. Some even left in laughter. There were a few who expressed that they sincerely hoped that the technology would come to perform, regardless of any negative opinions. However, this apparent suppression may have been done with Howard's ultimate blessing, since such a discrediting would likely draw attention away from his work yet get the ball rolling for world curiosity and open some minds. Making money at this sort of thing was a hopeful wish for Howard, since he is by no means a wealthy man. Aside from this, he just wanted to help the world. He reminded Al, however, that not all good things are good for mankind, and that the introduction of such technology to the world would indeed be disruptive. After considering his comments over a period of nearly 30 years, Al has come to realize that Howard's concerns may warrant some serious consideration. Al intends to see Howard again sometime to find out by some gentle fashion if this early suppression indeed was his intention, or if it simply occurred inadvertently. Also, Al plans to find out whatever else he can, since time is short and Howard, being 92 years old, may not be here for very much longer. As mentioned above, this account of Al's suppression story is a consolidation of emails exchanged between this writer, Gary Vesperman, and Al Witherspoon up until mid-October 2006. However, I have emailed Al a few more questions. But since then I haven't been able to contact Al by phone and email. For instance, it is not clear to me whether the two National Security Agency agents had rented a house across the street from Al's house or Howard's house. How were they able to still acquire needed magnets which they weren't allowed to buy? Exactly what did happen at Oak Ridge and Howard's? Involvement in the development of the atom bomb? What were the real reason and circumstances relating to the Science and Mechanics article? What happened in 1941 at the U.S. Patent Office 37 years before Howard actually commenced construction? What are the details regarding the construction of the generator at Jet Propulsion Labs? What's this about snowflakes and honeybees? Stuart Harris, Theory of Magnetic Instability. The theory of magnetic instability is a magnetic principle which appears to be the embryo of a valid free energy device. It was invented by Stuart Harris. He applied for a patent in 1978, and it was rejected. Dr. Marion Bowman from Washington, D.C. traveled out to Mr. Harris' home in Las Vegas, Nevada to witness the operation of the device. He was impressed and returned to Washington enthusiastic about its applications. Shortly after the demonstration, all copies of the patent application and other information subsequently disappeared from the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C. In addition, Mr. Harris' home was broken into and his original drawings, papers, applications, and correspondence were stolen. 4. Some unknown reason, they left behind the prototype. Coincidentally, Mr. Harris lives just a few blocks from the Office of Film Funding, include, where this writer, Gary Vesperman, used to work in Las Vegas. For some time I had Harris prototype on my desk which I delighted in demonstrating to visitors. A horizontal 3-inch long roller cylinder of about 5 stacked 1-inch diameter disc-shaped magnets rolls uphill, without energy input, between two similar 4-inch long cylinders of about 10 stacked 1-inch disc magnets placed in parallel with each other and taped onto a cardboard ramp, try 30 degrees up from the horizontal. Radio Shack sells disc magnets, but they are a little too strong. The horizontal cylinder rolls uphill a little too fast. Try weak disc magnets instead, or strong magnets that are made weaker by thermal or mechanical shock. I had noticed while playing with Harris' device that the roller cylinder would hang up at the top of the incline. But if the cylinder was immediately picked up and placed back at the bottom of the incline, within 60 seconds, it would accumulate enough additional rotational angular momentum of unknown origin to fall over the top of the incline. At the International Symposium on New Energy that was held in the Denver Hilton South, Denver, Co., 25 April 28, 1996, I asked Dr. Harold Aspden if his Aspden effect is the same as the roller cylinder's temporary accumulation of additional rotational angular momentum. He said it is not. However, Aspden and I decided that it appears to be such an interesting etheric energy phenomenon it should be investigated further. This is what would make a fine project for a grade school science class. Try magnetic disks of various sizes and strength. For each particular size/strength, carefully record various time delays between the time the rolling cylinder is taken off the top of the incline and placed at the bottom of incline. There might be some type of half-life whereby the roller cylinder's residual additional rotational angular momentum decays with time until the roller cylinder hangs up again at the top of the ramp. Lester J. Hendershot magnetic motor. During the late 1920s, Lester J. Hendershot, while working on a new type of aviation compass, stumbled across a method of generating energy. The Hendershot magnetic motor made headlines and attracted such big-name investors as Charles Lindbergh. Hendershot, while attempting to establish a true magnetic north compass, found that by cutting the same line of magnetic force north and south, he had an indicator of the true north, and that by cutting the magnetic field east and west, he could develop a rotary motion. He wove together a number of flat coils of wire and placed stainless steel rings, stakes of carbon and permanent magnets in various positions as an experiment. Based on this principle, after 2 years of trial and error, he built a magnetic motor that would self-rotate, to his surprise, at a constant speed of 1800 rpm while producing 45 horsepower. Hendershot changed directions and decided to build a generator on the same principle, after deducing that a magnetically powered motor was not as practical as a magnetically powered generator. Hendershot had discovered that the Earth's rotating magnetic field could be used to provide power to motors and generators, much like Nikola Tesla's discovery that the Earth was a huge capacitor, capable of providing significant amounts of electrical power. Simplified, Hendershot believed that if one were to cut the lines of force of the Earth's magnetic field, one could harness this to provide direct power to generators and motors. Nikola Tesla attempted to do just that, when he built his magnifying transformer at Shoreham, Long Island, New York. To read the first-hand accounts of Hendershot's historical encounters, see the following research. Links. http://www.time.com/time/magazine/article/0,9171,880984,00.html. https://securенetsolhost.com/newenergy.org/alt/radonfuel.htm. http://www.clubusenet.com/thread/2627119.html. http://www.borderlands.com/freeenergy.htm. http://www.tech_vol_v048/tech_v041_tech_p004.pdf. http://www.clarabelle.net/article/ourreaderswrite.html. http://www.freepatentsonline.com/20070007844.html. http://www.rexresearch.com/feg/fag1.htm #Hendershot